Okay, everybody. Hello out there on YouTube. Welcome to the Tom Salta Masterclass live event. This is for all students of my Masterclass series to come in person and live with me and to ask questions based on the course or other related things pertaining to the whole world of music for games and music production and career advice and all of that kind of stuff. So when I push this button, this should bring up, oh yay, it works. Look at that. All right, so we have everybody here with us. We have a group today. We got Adrian and Kai, Juan, Deborah, Joe, Danny Ellis, Michael, Greg, and Manuel. I think I have everybody, right? All right, cool. So we're gonna kind of, ooh, and someone else is coming in right now. All right, so we're gonna jump in and start fielding some questions. I want to get it to as many as I can. So let's start with you, Adrian. You're up.
Thanks, Tom. Okay, so my question is about middleware engines. I noticed that people use two in the industry, FMOD and WWise. In the video game industry, which one you think they use the most? If you're starting in this industry, do you think how important it is to know one of these? And also, which one you think we should start learning? Because I mean, since it's two that we need to, start like looking for tutorials and all that stuff.
Right.
Which one do you think is right now the most important to start doing that? Because it's time that we need to spend just learning that.
In my experience, I see that WWise comes up as the one that most people seem to be using, at least on the projects and games that I work on. That seems to be quite of an industry standard in there. So if you're going to brush up on middleware, I'd say that's a really good one. And what's awesome about it is that it's free. It's free to use and to learn. The only time you have to start paying for licenses is when you start doing stuff that is getting released publicly for sale. I haven't had to license it myself because I'm not a game developer. But yeah, that's the one I would do. It's a really good question because a good follow-up question to that is often, do I have to know it? And how well do I have to know it? And, the thing is with middleware, as a game composer, it's really great to know how the middleware works, right? I mean, you want to understand what's happening under the hood so that you can be better prepared to give your client files that are going to work. So it's good to understand what it needs. It needs to know lengths and tempos, and you want to know how it could work and if it can do overlapping and dovetailing and all those kind of things, because then you can help them make better decisions or maybe come up with solutions. I admit I'm not an expert with WWise, but I know the concepts of it. I have used it. I have done some basic programming, but when it really matters, when I have to deliver something already in the middleware, I will hire someone who's like really fluent at it, someone who could actually teach it. But at least I know how it works, and I can come up with solutions for the client and give them options and say, well, maybe if we do this and we loop this and then you layer it with this and then we have a little transition. So at least understand what it's about, and you can do that by again looking at some of the online courses. But if you want to kind of go to the next level, it's only going to bring you more opportunities, because the more that you can do, the more you have to offer a client, especially an independent developer. Because a lot of times composers are like, well, can you just like program it for us? And if you can say like, yeah, then it's like awesome. So that's what I would do. Good question.
Thanks.
You got it. All right, cool. Let's see. All right, Kai, you are up.
Hello. So I'm working on a game at the moment that's a roguelike that's set in ancient Greece, and you've got to command like different waves of Spartans, and they want the music to be really interactive and it's really cinematic at the same time. And I'm going to be programming it as well because I know quite a bit about API.
Yeah.
And they want it to change, like when you change position with like the Spartans or how well you're doing, they want different music to come in. and if you're losing, they want a different kind of music. And I'm wondering, from a writing perspective, what do you have to consider when you're working with music that interactively?
Yeah, right. Well, the considerations with regard to game music really stem from the idea that this is all nonlinear, but it's going to be connected, right? So just imagine composing in a single piece of music, a single movement that has all these different states in it. So imagine that you have your tension state and your combat state and your or any other state. Name whatever state you want. Imagine they're all there, and it's like in this constantly evolving track. The idea in games is that you're going to jump around from one section to the next, right? So think about it. As a composer, if you're jumping from bar 9 to bar 28, tell me what considerations you have to keep in mind.
Right, yeah, so it needs. So if we're just jumping from there, then it needs to at least have a connecting theme. It needs to have something melodically that will work from bar 1 to bar 28.
But take it one step backwards. Think about some of the basic technical requirements, like just globally. Think about tempo. Think about key. Things like that. Is it going to sound good going immediately faster? Or would it sound better if we were to kind of keep that pulse about the same? What about the keys? Would it sound good if you're going to transpose, if you're going to modulate? Do you need to modulate? Should you modulate? And if you do, what key do you go to? Do you go to the relative minor? Do you go to the relative major? Do you go a half step? Do you go a whole step up? Do you go a major third up? Do you go a fifth up? Like, what sounds good? Like, those are the kind of considerations you want to keep in mind. Again, think of it like a non-linear playlist, because that's kind of what it is. Right? When I was doing Killer Instinct, right, with Season 3, with Cell Dweller, the strategy that I thought would make the most sense is to compose one big, long, 10-minute track, right, with all these different bits and pieces in it. And then when we know that we have a great piece of music that has all the content, and I can jump from, let's say, a normal state to a combat state to a boring state to not an ultra combo, but a combo state, or whatever it is, that musically that makes sense. Ooh, that's kind of cool. Oh, I like the modulation there. Oh, okay, yeah, the tempo sounds good. All those kind of things. And if it sounds abrupt, why does it sound abrupt? Is it because of the composition that it sounds abrupt, or is it because of a technical consideration, like there's no cymbal swell or there's no connecting tissue? And if that's the case, then you have to make a decision. Well, how do we transition? So for example, I'll give you two potential solutions for that. One solution is create a transition piece that kind of goes over the two parts like a Band-Aid. Like that gets triggered one bar before and rings out like a shh. Or how about a 1 bar or a half bar pre-trigger, meaning like before the next section starts, have a little swell or something like that gets triggered 2 beats before it actually starts, and it overlaps with the previous section. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I hadn't considered writing it as like a 10-minute piece before, so that's really cool. So,
yeah.
And then if there is any, like you said, if there is any problems with connecting those two areas, then we can look into different transitions and then like stingers and stuff to piece it together properly.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, don't feel bad. Not everyone would do it that way. I mean, I was speaking with Mick Gordon when he was handing off the Killer Instinct, after working on Season 2. And I asked him, like, hey, Mick, I mean, he's amazing, right? I mean, how did you do it? I mean, did you do it this way? And I said, does it make sense, to make a whole big piece? He's like, oh, I didn't do it that way. I said, I just composed each piece on its own. I'm like, really? I said, that's insane. But he did it that way. He's like, I didn't think of it. But whatever. I mean, it's just another way of kind of thinking when it comes to game music. And how could you do something that is going to make the creative process more seamless for you.
Yeah.
Right?
Totally.
For me, I know I don't want to start thinking about like, all these little pieces. I'd rather think of it as a piece of music and then make sure that we can chop it up afterwards. I think that lends itself to more musical results.
Yeah, cool. I'm definitely going to give that a go. Thank you.
Awesome. Great. All right, these are very good questions. And by the way, to everybody on YouTube, I will do my best to also field your questions as well. Certainly, I'm going to prioritize the students, the masterclass students here. But I will also aim with time remaining to get to your questions as well. So please feel free to join the conversation if you're watching this on YouTube. And of course, you can always join the masterclass series as well. All right, cool. So next is going to be Juan. Hey there, Juan. How are you?
Hello. Fine, thank you. Now I have a question that a friend of mine that is now composing for a video game kind of gave me is a problem for mastering. He's doing almost everything by himself, and now he has a question for mastering because he doesn't know what to have in consideration when you begin this process. Is it important to know what is the media? What will be the type of video game? Does that affect how it's gonna be listened? For example, the speakers of the console, or maybe it's gonna be on a phone or meant to play in PC. What do you do in the case of mastering? What do you consider apart from those little things that I mentioned now?
Yeah. Okay. And, I want to be careful when we talk about the term mastering because, let's say a true mastering engineer might cringe when he hears us talking or she hears us talking about this whole mastering thing because true mastering, in my opinion, is ideally not done by the person who created the music. And, true mastering is not throwing Ozone up on a channel and saying, oh, now it's mastered. But I know what you mean. And you know what I mean. So yes, I mean, it is good to kind of put some finalizing on the master bus for overall shaping and consistency and volume. So that's what we're going to be talking about when we use the term mastering, just so everybody understands. Okay, so yes, you do want to consider what it's going to be heard on. But these days, and I will say, is that even these little phones, even those iPhones and Galaxies and all that kind of stuff, I'll tell you, I mean, no, they don't have a lot of they have no subs going on. But first of all, a lot of people will play with their earbuds, right? And quite frankly, they do a pretty darn good job of translating, a full spectrum piece of music. I'm kind of impressed. So, my advice is this. The most important thing, before you even think about what it's going to be played on, is your music complementing the game itself? Is it complementing the sound effects and dialogue of the game? Like, you don't want to have your music too bright or too dull, first of all, right? It really depends. It depends on the kind of game. Like, I'm working on this big horror game right now, and on this one I found that there's a certain shape to the music that tends to be on the darker side and doesn't have a lot of bright things just because of the nature. It just feels at home this way. Now, that's not the same mastering that I use on some of the other things that I've done or are doing right now that are coming out. It all depends on the game. So first and foremost, before you consider what it's going to be heard on, I think you need to consider what it's being accompanied with, right? The sound and the dialogue. First things first. And that part just comes from listening, getting footage from the game and listening to your mix, and maybe playing the footage on a separate video, like a separate video alongside of it, and playing your music and saying, you gotta want to lower it. Like, a lot of times I'll lower my stuff about even 12 dB because it's like, the music is not going to be the loudest thing you always hear. And I'm like, does this feel like it's in there? Okay, so once you get to that part, once you clear that hurdle, as far as the other stuff, I just think it's more important to be very consistent when you deliver music. Make sure your volumes are kind of consistent. Otherwise, your client's going to be like going crazy, like making this louder, making this softer, whatever. You don't want to kind of drive them crazy to be like mixing your stuff. Have it be consistent. So that's the first thing. I think after that, you want to make sure that you're not depending on low subs, especially if your stuff is going to be on a mobile device. Right? You don't want to have that stuff that is like in the 20s and 30s and 40s that is critical to the music. Right? But, I've learned from just mixing music for 30 years is that, a lot of the best engineers, they started using speakers that translated very well, but they didn't have a lot of hype. Like the Yamaha NS10s, that's what made them famous. Bob Clearmountain made those things famous. That was the dawn of the bookshelf speaker. And what I'm getting at is if they sound good on that, they'll probably sound good on anything. So the idea that you want to make sure that you don't depend on things on a sound system that has all these low subs only. You want to kind of make it, you want to make it sound good on that. If you listen to my scores on a big sound system, they're, they should blast you out of your chair, I hope. But if you listen to it on an iPhone, like even the Halo Spartan Assault stuff, that's a great example of something that translates very well on little speakers because I wasn't depending on the low end to make it sound good. And there also are ways to make sure that when you put bass into something that you put subharmonics or layers in it that enhance it so that it can be heard at higher frequencies rather than just the low, ultra low, sub 80 hertz stuff. I know it's a big long answer, but there's a lot of stuff in there. Does that make sense? All right, cool.
Yes,
good question.
Thank you.
You got it. All right, Joe. You are up.
Hey, thanks again for doing this.
Of course.
So, I was watching some playthrough footage
Yeah.
of Honor of Kings and Overwatch earlier this week.
Yeah.
And basically, I was noticing that a lot of the music sounds really wide, and the same could be said of the original OST release of Overwatch.
Right.
But I was also comparing that to a remastered OST release.
Okay.
And I noticed that the music there kind of got rid of that wideness, and it was more compressed. And I was wondering, is there a general convention for in-game assets to have less compression and basically to operate at fewer loops?
Okay,
And
let me first make sure that I understand what your observations are. Are you saying that when you say remastered, are they both in-game, or is one a soundtrack and one is in-game?
the remastered one was a soundtrack.
Okay, and the soundtrack is the one that was less wide?
That's right.
And what about the compression? Was more compressed?
It was.
Okay, so on a soundtrack, it's more compressed and less wide, and in-game, it's more wide and less compressed. Right?
This is true.
More dynamic range. That makes complete sense. All right, and here's why. In a game or in a movie, all those the sound effects and dialogue, or at least the ones that are important, usually are happening in the center channel. Right. So if you want that music to not get in the way, a good technique is to make the music wide, or pan things, or put imagers or whatever it is, to kind of keep the music in those left and right channels and not so much in the middle channel, because it can start to confuse the audio and the listener. Okay? So that's the wide factor. Now, as far as the compression factor, meaning less compression, more dynamic range in a gaming environment or in a movie environment, that makes sense too. Because think about it. especially today, most people are playing games like Overwatch, like what you're talking about, on a pretty good situation there. They got a pretty nice sized monitor or screen, and they got some decent speakers or good headphones. Okay? So you want to have like soft things soft and the loud things loud. You want to have this dynamic range. I mean, watch a movie. I mean, watch, I don't care what you do, whether it's Star Wars or Inception or Transformers or anything else. The quiet stuff is really quiet. Then that's because when it gets loud, they want it to feel loud. If you compress it, like you would for a soundtrack, what it's doing is it's taking the highs and the lows and it's kind of compressing them a little bit more closer together so that there's less dynamic range. Why? Well, because typically when you're listening to a soundtrack, you're usually not listening that loud. You're listening in your car or, in the kitchen or whatever, on your speaker, whatever it is. And if you have too wide of a dynamic range, you'll be chasing the volume knob all the time. You're like, oh, that's really soft. And then all of a sudden, ta-da, it's like it blows your speaker out. You know what I mean? So that's why I guess on soundtracks, they'll tend to kind of make it more limited or compressed. And they don't have to enhance the wideness for the sake of it not competing with all the in-game stuff. Does that make sense?
Totally. That's so interesting. Thanks.
Oh, good. I'm glad you're in the right place if you found that interesting. Okay. All right. So anyway, we have next up Deborah. How are you, Deborah?
There we go. You can hear me?
I can hear you just great.
Awesome. I'm doing pretty decently, but thank you.
All right.
I wanted to ask, I remember, I think it was in the last masterclass you mentioned in part of answering someone's question, was to stick to your strengths, when it comes to composing. I think when you send in like a soundtrack for a review or something, I think that's what it was. But the point is, it caused the question as in, how would you overcome a weakness in something in terms of composing? Like, for example, like if you're really terrible at creating synth music, but they ask you to create a synth soundtrack, like, do you reject the project or do you accept the challenge? And how do you overcome, your Goliath?
Wow. Woo! That's scary, right? That's scary when you get asked to do something on a professional basis that is out of your comfort zone, right? I think it comes down to, at least for me, do I want to challenge myself? Would it be exciting to me? Do I enjoy it? Do I think I could enjoy it? And if the answer to those are yes, I say yes. I think I learned, there is the thinking that you kind of never say no, right? When you're looking for, what's the worst thing that can happen? The worst thing that happens is you don't get it. The other thinking is that, well, if I don't feel I'm going to do something that's on a professional level, I don't want to kind of embarrass myself and make it like, ooh, this person really sucks. You know what I mean? So I think it's hard to answer that, but I'll give you an example in what happened to me that does pertain to this. When I was asked to do Red Steel, the original Red Steel, back in 2004, the scope of the music was, hey, do you have experience doing Japanese sounding music? All right. And the instant I heard that, I was so excited for the possibility to do that, because I got involved in game audio because I just love the creative freedom. And I love world musics, and I love doing eclectic things and different things. That was like exciting to me. So for me, I was like, yes, I can do this. Absolutely. I didn't have the experience, but I knew I could do it. I just felt like excited to do it. Okay. So I said yes. And, of course, after hanging up the phone, I'm like, oh my God. But I dove in. I mean, I called the Japanese embassy. I started researching. I found Japanese musicians, and which led me into a whole network of music resources. And I just studied that and studied it and studied it. And it turned out great, to the point where the first piece of music that Nintendo heard, they thought a Japanese composer did it. Okay, so that's a success story to saying yes. But there have been plenty of situations where I'm like, oh, gosh, I can't say no. I need the work, but let me try it. And I didn't get the gig. And some people were like, yeah, thanks a lot. And, it doesn't fit the project, whatever. And, maybe they didn't call me again. But I thought maybe I could try. I don't know. I think it would be a rare situation for you to just say no, absolutely not, unless you don't want to do it. Unless it's something that's like, yeah, you know what? I would not, even if I got the gig, I just wouldn't enjoy it. Then say no. But I'd say other places, just challenge yourself. Go for the ride, go for the adventure. That would be my advice. I don't know if it's the best advice, but that's the advice I would give you.
Well, it's definitely a good one. So thank you.
All right, my pleasure. Manuel, I think you're up.
Yeah, hi Tom, how's it going?
Hey.
Okay, so I'm right in the middle of making my new template.
Yes.
It's always a big challenge.
Yes.
I'm guessing you have a pretty nice template, like 4,000 tracks or whatever.
I do not.
No, you don't?
I do not.
Oh, but I'm guessing you have some sort of experience with
Well, we
templates.
can talk about templates, but go
Okay.
ask your question. I have a different principle of philosophy when it comes to templates.
Okay, so well, it's always nice to have like a bunch of tracks ready to go.
Yeah.
But when it's time to mix, it's maybe not so fun to have 500 tracks or whatever. So I'm a bit lost in what criteria I should use for the reduction of those tracks. Should I just, for example, all of the Spitfire strings, put them in one group, or split them into long and short, or split them into highs and lows? And that also goes a bit connected with the delivery of stems, which is sometimes needed. So either if I'm going to do the mixing or if I'm going to send the stems for someone else,
Right.
What would you recommend for that?
Right, good. And I think in Game Music Essentials, I think we do actually cover some of this, and where I describe how people do split some of these things out. Whether it's shorts and longs, highs and lows, frequency, type, all that kind of stuff. I'm not sure if you remember that or not, but I think the thing is this, and this relates to the reason that I don't have my Tom Salta template. I don't have that. And the reason is because the kind of scores that I do usually are quite unique. Each one is unique. I'm not usually hired. Well, I mean, I do get hired for a number of repeat things, but I don't have, let's say, my set orchestral template because, like, this template covers everything that I've ever done. It doesn't. I also don't like seeing large lists of stuff. It kind of sucks the creativity out of me. As I've said many times before, I'd much prefer to have a small box of crayons to work with than some big box with 200 different shades of blue. And the reason is I can just stop thinking about like which sounds to use, and it just sucks the life out of it. So what I will do, and now I think we're coming back to what might help you, is when you start a project, figure out who's in the band, right? I talk about this in Game Music Essentials all the time. Who's in the band? And as you do it, go through your list. If you already have like a starting template, great. Do I need this sound? Do I need this sound? Is this ever going to be used? If yes, keep it. If not, get rid of it. Try to prune it down to the stuff that you're going to need. So when I start a project, I might have, let's say, a previous project that would have a bunch of content that would be good for this one. right? So I might just import tracks from that project specifically, like, ooh, I love the percussion on this, or I love that timpani, or I love the strings that I came up with, or I love these synth sounds, or whatever it is, and I can kind of suck those into a brand new project, and what I start to get is this unique template to that project, and it generally gets pruned as I go, and it ends up being a good starting place for the rest of the stuff that only has the stuff that pertains to that score and not superfluous stuff that I always have in my toolbox for everything that I do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but when you're working with any particular project, when you have already your custom template or session for that project, how do you approach the mixing? For example, assuming everything is going to be done in the box with virtual instruments, I'm guessing you don't work with each articulation of each instrument as a single track. You work like in the broad strokes, like all of the Spitfire strings need a bit more high end or whatever, or how do you prepare that?
Okay, so now you're kind of talking about how I arrange things for mixing, right? Okay. It does depend. And if I feel that if I feel that like all the strings need a little bit more brightness, which is rare, but if I do, I will bust those strings all together on one channel, and I'll put that overall effect on that channel that affects things. So I will use buses quite a bit for that. If there's going to be global adjustments to sections or groups of instruments, I can do that. I like having different articulations on different tracks. That's not kind of what you asked, but I think you might have that in the back of your mind as a question. So just letting you know, I do that rather than key switches. Just because key switches become a pain when you need to kind of fast forward and reverse, and you got to worry about chasing them around. Sometimes they're in the wrong, and it's like, that was supposed to be staccato, and now it's playing sustains. Let me just separate them. I also find it's good for running stems, because a lot of times I'll put my sustain strings together, and I'll put my staccato strings or spiccato strings together as a different stem. So I kind of group them. I generally tend to group my tracks in folders that pertain to the export of the stems, because that'll save me time later, and it's also a way for me to quickly navigate toward the sounds that I want and keep them organized. Like, oh my God, where is that pad sound? Oh, why don't I go to my pads folder? There it is. Okay, but I don't always apply broad strokes to groups of sections. But if I do, I'll send those things to buses. And then everything will eventually make its way back to the stereo master bus. Does that answer the rest of your question?
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, it makes sense because if you're tailoring each session to each project, I'm guessing the stems that you need to deliver also vary.
That's correct.
A lot from each project.
That's right. Because the stems that you deliver in the world of game audio are not always for mixing purposes. They might be for behavioral purposes, for layering purposes. Right? I'll be talking a bit about that in the next course coming out in September, about grouping, how I did for a particular project, and the way I kind of grouped the stems had everything to do with the behavior in the game rather than the instruments themselves. Right, so
awesome.
It all
looking
depends.
forward to it.
Yeah, it should be cool. All right, good question.
Okay, thank you very much.
Good question. Now, I want to see. Can we sneak a YouTube question in here? Joe, do we have a music-oriented YouTube question that we can pull from? All right, cool. So here's one from Martin off YouTube. With the limitation of programming in 8-bit games, I wanted to ask, what compositional techniques or resources do you use to adapt the music with the changes that the video game proposes? Okay, limitation of programming in 8-bit games. Now, that I'm really not sure, because a lot of games that I know that do 8-bit are not truly limited. They just intentionally make them sound that way. So I mean, are we talking about like real limitations, like in the 90s, like with like 8-bit engines, or see if you can kind of narrow it down? But I'll try to make an assumption here. What compositional techniques or resources did you use to adapt the music with the changes in the video game proposed? Okay, well, the closest I ever got to an 8-bit kind of thing, which wasn't an 8-bit, but it was more of a very rudimentary base of instruments, where I actually didn't deliver the audio files. I actually delivered the MIDI files and the instruments and the actual samples. And that was a game on the DS called Sprung. It was a dating emulator. It was hilarious. Actually, I went back and I played it. I'm like, wow, okay, that actually worked out. But that was a pain. And the limitation that I had to deal with was, okay, every voice has to matter. All right, and you can't have two. You got to keep in mind that if you're gonna do a chord, it's probably got to be a triad. And you got to keep your overall voice count in mind. Now, again, this is something that a lot of people like making music today would be like, "What are you talking about?" But back in the day, in the 80s and stuff, even for synthesizers, there was a limit to the number of notes that could play simultaneously. Some synths were monophonic, like the Mini Moog Model D that I have right sitting next to me here. And then some could play 8 notes, and some could play 16, and some could play 64. Whoa. But, so one of the things you have to kind of keep in mind is you got to make your composition sound good with just the fewest notes possible. You got to be really efficient. You got to deal with that limitation. All right, so whatever your instrument is it a guitar? Is it a piano? For me, it's a piano. So I'd make sure that when I compose on a piano, I'm like, okay, here's your bass line, just one note. And here's my chord, and then here's my melody. That's one note, so that's what's the max notes? And then I have maybe a kick drum and a snare, so maybe the drums are only taking up one voice. Maybe I'm not going to overlap. It'll be kick, snare, hi-hat, kick, I won't. So you got to kind of keep voices in mind, and you got to be really efficient. You got to make sure that it's going to sound good with the most minimum number of simultaneous notes possible. That's probably the best answer I can kind of give you. And when it comes to 8-bit, I mean, you have to choose your sounds wisely. If you have your palette of 8-bits, there are a lot of cool 8-bit simulators today, like one's called High Score by Renegade Soundplay, and it's awesome. David, the creator of it, he went and sampled all the original source chips, and so it would be very, very interesting to see. You can make it sound legit. So anyway, hopefully that covers some of the things that you wanted to know. Let's jump back in with our students here. Juan, you have a question for us.
Yes. When I heard your story about the Japanese music you had to investigate, how do you approach when you analyze music for that kind of job, when you have to compose music you haven't worked with before, or you don't know that really well? How do you approach analyzing this new music you are discovering for the first time?
Right. So your question is, how do I approach learning or figuring out how to compose music that I'm not familiar with?
Yes.
Okay. Great question. And the way I do it is by studying it. And I don't mean by books or anything like that and looking at the history. I mean by listening to it very closely, very critically. Anyone that knows me knows that I'm a very critical listener. And I don't mean critical as far as being hard on it. I mean, I listen very closely and accurately and try to figure out every element that's happening. Kind of like an explosion diagram. Ever buy a piece of furniture and it comes with instructions and they show you the parts, and then they show you the parts kind of individual, like here's this and here's the screw and there's this, and you see them all separated. I try to reverse engineer the music to figure out what parts are in it. Another way is like I compare music to cooking a lot. You taste a great dish, you want to kind of figure out what the ingredients are in it. So the first thing I always do is listen critically and analyze every bit of it. the instruments used, the mixing of it, the technique, the instruments themselves. What are those instruments? How are they typically used? How do I convince someone that I am familiar with this, that I've been doing this music my whole life? How do I do that? Again, by listening, by asking questions. With Red Steel, I remember, asking a lot of questions of some of the musicians and vocalists. They gave me an education. I'm like, okay, here's the koto, and could you, I had a question, and like, well, typically this is the way it's played, or this is the typical kind of performance that you would hear on it. But again, I mean, these days it's easier than ever. Thanks to YouTube and stuff. I mean, when I started out, there wasn't as much available out there. But now, I mean, you want to say, you want to learn Japanese music, or, how to play the pipa. YouTube it. Watch people play it. Listen to it. And then try to imitate it. My greatest teacher in life has always been imitating. When I was a kid, taking piano lessons with my mom, I was always listening and copying stuff and then playing on the piano. I'd be listening and copying. I'd go to the arcade and listen to my favorite arcade game, Dig Dug and Donkey Kong, and come home and try to play the songs. And then when I got my first synthesizer in eighth grade, 1985, oh my God, I would do my best to copy and listen to, Depeche Mode and Yaz and New Order, and like try to imitate it, and learn how to do exactly what they are doing by copying. And that's the way I learn anything, including the Japanese music of Red Steel, and the Chinese music of Red Steel too, so that's how I do it. Does that answer your question?
Thank you very much. Yes, it does.
Awesome. My pleasure. All right, cool. So let's see. If you have any questions, jump on YouTube or right here. I'm going to ask you a question before we wrap. What are some of your biggest challenges right now? Everybody, if you have a question, raise your hand or put it in the comments on YouTube. As a composer in your professional career, what are some of your biggest challenges right now? All right. Kai?
So I think my biggest challenge at the moment is convincing myself that I am worth more money than I'm actually charging for. That's probably my biggest at the moment.
Okay. So what are you going to do about that?
I'm going to sort of analyze how long it takes me to kind of make my music, and take that against the amount of money that I actually have to make to survive, and then I'll probably just end up doubling it, because I've also noticed that the more I'm charged, the better my music is, regardless of what it is that I'm working on as well.
There is a sweet spot, right? Value versus the amount of creative effort that you put into something, and it's trick. One of the most asked questions is, how much do I charge? How much do I charge? And there is no set answer. I can't tell you how much to charge, because there isn't a set rate. It depends on everything. Yeah. I mean, even if you take the same composer, that number can change how much to charge based on who the client is. Right? It depends on their budget. It depends on the scope of the project. So there's a variable thing right there. But I think you're onto something here, and I'm going to offer this up as something that everyone could apply in their own world. One of the things that I did years ago, when I was trying to say, you know what, I'm noticing that, like any creative, I love what I do, and I get lost in my work. And if I were to total up the number of hours that I put into this piece of music, I don't even know. How much did I put 20 hours into this thing? Did I put 10 hours? Did I put 5 hours? What about all the revisions? How much time did I put into this 2-minute piece of music or 4-minute piece of music? And then how much did I get paid? All right, that was the question that started me on this this idea of trying, how do I figure this out? You know, I don't just do music in games. I do music in the corporate world. I do film trailers. I'll do songs, mixing, like mastering, whatever. I get a lot of different things, and there's all different ways to charge and different levels and all that. I started finding that some of my corporate work was paying me a lot for a little. Like, I was like, man, this isn't exciting, but I got a lot more money for this than I am getting for game music if you were to put like hours of work. You know, and I was starting to factor this in, and I'm trying to figure out, like, where's my rate? You know, what's my rate for trailers? What's my rate for corporate advertising? What's my rate for game composing? What's my rate? And those rates are different, by the way. One thing that really kind of helped me out, to put it in perspective, is, okay, I have a number in head. What am I worth? You know, what is it worth me sitting in a chair, not doing anything else and working for an hour? What's my hourly rate? And I didn't know the answer. So I got a little app, and it was a little app that keeps like an hourly tracker. It's meant for like corporate people or sales people that work with different clients and like have to clock in and clock out. Or, you know, private consultants that have to bill their hours and their time and keep track of their receipts and all that stuff. So what I started doing is every project that I had, I created a separate little project in this app, and I started clocking in and clocking out. And you know what? At the end of the day, doing that, first of all, made me work more efficiently because I knew I was on the clock. So even not even keeping track of it, I'm like, wait, I'm on the clock. My time is worth something. So that was one revelation. My time is worth something, and I'm on the clock, and when I'm sitting here browsing YouTube, I'm not working. So how much time am I actually working on that track? Just work time, right? I don't work, you know, I don't sit in a chair 9 and leave at 5, and, you know, it's not like that. It's on and off, on and off. And then after that, when I finish a particular project or, you know, a piece of music, I'm like, whoa, okay, I put that much time in. And if I divide that, you know, and I factor in the amount of money I got paid for it, I started seeing an average show up. I started seeing this kind of average range, and that started honing me into something that felt good for me. Because at the end of the day, you kind of have to feel right about it. And quite frankly, let's be honest. Someone who's starting out should not be charging what someone who's been doing it for 30 years is charging. Why is that? Well, one of the reasons is someone who's been doing it for 30 years can usually do a lot very quickly. You know, what I can do now in 10 minutes would have taken me, you know, 10 hours, you know, when I first started. You know, because I could work more efficiently. So my time is worth more right away because of the amount of experience I have. So these are all little factors to keep in mind, but I hope my answer gave you some things to kind of consider.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember my first project, I managed to kind of count up the amount of hours that I worked on it and then compared it to how much that I actually charged.
Right.
And I realized, wow, yeah, my rate needs to go up because it was like 800 to like 1,000 hours on this soundtrack.
Oh God.
And I was just,
yeah.
It was large, yeah. But yeah, just then seeing the amount of money, I was just like, yeah, I'm actually worth more than if I can do all of that.
Yeah, and you know what? You can't work in a vacuum. I think it's really important to educate yourself and talk to some of your colleagues and contemporaries who I hopefully can be honest with you. You know, and you know, sometimes the clients will kind of tell you what their budgets are. I mean, that's always great and important to understand what their budgets are, you know, before you start throwing numbers out. Ask them. Yeah. Ask them what the budget is, you know, figure out how much time you're willing to put in with that budget, you know. Anyway, there's a lot of ways to go about it, but I think you get the idea. Yeah, all right, totally. Let's see if we can jump back to some of the questions here. All right, let's see. I have in here in the chat. Write something that people will be proud of. Yeah, I hear you. You know, it's important that you yourself are proud as a composer of what you write. You know, I will say that. When it comes, if that's a challenge for you, you got to write something that you yourself are proud of. And I think really that's all that matters. Because you know what? People are going to have their opinions all day and all night. All right? So you can't worry about that. You're never going to, never, ever, 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 ever worry about other people's expectations of you. I mean, unless we're talking about a paying client, of course. But, you know, people are always going to say, oh, that sucks or that's amazing. And unless you feel satisfied with it, then that's what you need to work on. It's got to please you. And if you're satisfied with it, you feel you did your best and you're getting better and you're growing, then that's all you can hope for. Even this day, you know, I'm not satisfied unless, you know, it's something that I feel like, yeah, I'm good with that. I could put my name on that. Okay? Here's one thing. Let's see. One thing I read, this is from Deborah. Deborah, you want me to read this or do you want to ask it?
Oh, no, I was mentioning to Juan when he asked his question. So I was like, hey, that's something that I also came across, so that might help.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Okay, cool. Excellent. Let's see what other questions we kind of have here. All right. Joe, do we have any other YouTube questions that are music related?
Yes, I'm pulling one in now.
We have time probably for one or two more tops. What's that?
About prioritizing.
Prioritizing.
In order to finish work by deadline.
Oh, okay. So what's the prioritizing? Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, the original question looks to be if you take the time to learn and study, how to choose your priorities or choose a priority that the company gives in order to finish the project in time.
Oh, I understand now. I understand. Right. How much time do you take when you have a deadline looming? How much time do you take to study versus get going and composing? Great question. And that's something that I will also say is I talk about at depth in the creative process video, which is part of Game Music Essentials. So if you haven't checked that out, you might want to check it out at my masterclass, which we'll put the link up after here, but it's tomsalta.com/masterclass. I'd say you want to certainly leave yourself enough time to do the composing. I mean, right? I mean, if you know that this is going to take you a week to get through the whole thing, and you're starting on Monday, or you have 2 weeks to do something, but it'll take you maybe a week to do or a week and a half, well, then take a day or two and start studying. I mean, study enough so that you can do what you need to do. Study enough so that you have a good sense of what has to be done. I mean, think about an actor. Think about an actor getting a role where they have to, become someone completely different. They have to really study. They're doing a character that is very much different than themselves. Let's say they're doing a psychotic, criminal or serial killer or something like that. Maybe they are going to go and go to prisons or go to speak to psychologists or watch videos of people who are like that to really study their mannerisms. I mean, at some point they have to start studying their script and whatever, but it's good to divide up the time so that you give yourself enough time to do your research and development. If I were to average it out for me, maybe I'll dedicate about 10% of my time in the R&D phase before I actually get into the music itself. All right, so that R&D phase can be part of the education or just listening to reference music or whatever it is. Does that answer your question? I hope so. All right, so I think we are just about out of time. I do want to remind everybody that if you are interested in the world of game audio, please do check out my masterclass series, Game Music Essentials. It's found at tomsalta.com/masterclass. I will be running for the next 48 hours, I will be running a $30 discount. So after this here, and there will be that code, which we'll put in the comments. I forgot what the code is. But anyway, there will be a sale for temporarily, so if you are interested in it. But join us. We do this every month, so even if you're not part of it, you'll be able to come back. The next one is going to be on September 1st. September 1st, we'll be doing this again live with Q&A. And it's a great way to kind of ask as many questions as you have about this world, because there are tons of them. So anyway, thank you very much, everyone, for joining me. I hope to see you next time, and keep going, keep being creative. I'll see you all later. All right, take care, everyone.
Bye.
All right, bye-bye.